Alright, so now that we have our main parts, we actually want to go in and create our legs. Now to do this, we're going to put it in a sub-assembly, and then we're going to bring that sub-assembly into our main assembly. So we don't need to look at this right now. We're going to go into a new design, and you'll notice immediately that our old design is still at the top here in a tab, so you can always switch between. We're going to immediately save, and we're going to call this the leg sub-assembly. Make sure that it's located within your Hexapod project, which is the one we made earlier. Then both of these files that you can see in your tabs will be located in the same project and easy to find. Press save. See the little tick, and we're now called Leg Sub Assembly. First thing we're going to do, as always, is go in, create a new component. We're actually going to start by creating the two linkages. So our part is going to have a foot, a main leg block, and then the linkages between them. We're going to call our first linkage linkage 1, and press OK. Now that that's activated, we can create a new sketch, and instead of being on the bottom surface, which you often start with, because our linkages are on the side of our blocks, we actually want to be looking at their profile on the side. So we're going to select one of the sides. In this case, I'm going to select the right hand side plane, which is the ZY plane. Click on right so we can look at it. I'm actually going to use the slot tool within the create menu of the sketching workspace. So we're going to create a slot, and a center to center slot is the one we're going to use. This means that you define the distance between the two center points of your slot and the thickness. So we're going to click to create one center point. We want our second center point to be 70 millimeters away. Click again, and it'll allow you to drag out the thickness. In this case, we want it to be 15 millimeters wide. Click again, and it will create your slot. Now in this case, we're going to go in and we're going to joint these linkages to other parts. So it doesn't matter too much that we haven't referenced it to the origin or to anywhere else. It doesn't matter too much where you clicked. Unlike before, where we used the hole tool to create the holes going through everything, we're going to create our holes on the linkages and then use them as reference points on our parts later. So to do that easily, we're going to go in, create a circle, and use these points that have been generated as the center of radius of these arcs. This is really useful, we can use them. Click in the center, and we want these to be 5 millimeter holes. Do the same on the other side, and what this means is that when we extrude it, these areas won't be selected, and they'll therefore not be extruded, and we'll have our hole left behind. That's our first linkage. We're going to create our second one in the same way. Create, slot, center slot. But instead of being 70 millimeters this time, we want it to be 50 millimeters. Click, and then we're going to keep it the same thickness, 15 millimeters, and then add our two circles, 5 millimeters large, just as before. And we now have our two linkages. What I want to do now is finish the sketch and extrude it through. Press E to extrude, and you'll see that when I hover over, this area is now cut off from the inside area here. So therefore, when I click on this, it automatically doesn't select the center of those holes, which is what we want because we don't want those extruded, so that we have these holes left behind. Now we want our linkage to be 6 millimeters thick. So type in 6, and you'll notice I'm only doing this bottom one here. Now whilst I sketched both of these in the same sketch, I want my second body to be a new component. In this case, I'm within the linkage 1 component, so this is correct. But if I were to extrude this, the body would be in the wrong place. So I'm going to do this separately, and you'll see in a second. I want this as a new body within this component. Click OK. Now you'll see that this sketch disappears. That's okay because we can go in and unhide it again. Now I'm going to extrude again, select this top area, make it 6 millimeters, just as before, but instead of being a new body operation, I want to select a new component. Now this is a slightly different way that you can create a new component, but if I click OK now, you'll see that an entirely new component has been made. You might notice that it's actually within the linkage 1 component. And we don't want that, we want it to be outside. So you can find that you can drag and drop it on the outside. Now you'll notice that actually our new component is within the linkage 1 component, and we don't want that. We want it to be equal in levels. So what you can do is you can actually drag your component and you can drop it into your main leg subassembly V1. Alternatively, you could have extruded it after having activated the leg subassembly. Click new component within the extrude and it would have put it straight into the leg subassembly. We also don't want this to be called component 2, so I can select it, double click, and I'm going to call this linkage 2. If I reactivate our entire body, you'll see that now we have linkage 2 and linkage 1 as separate components. But you should be aware that the sketch for both is still within linkage 1. So there are different advantages and disadvantages to this. By making it all in one sketch, it's a little bit more tidy, but it might later on down the line make it a little bit more difficult, because if you're trying to find the sketch for linkage 2, you go into linkage 2, you'll see that it's not there. So as long as you remember where it is, that's absolutely fine. It's entirely up to your preference. I personally prefer having it within items, but another way you could do it is you could have not generated a new component at the beginning, had Leg Sub Assembly chosen and created the sketch within Leg Sub Assembly, and a sketches folder would have appeared here. Then for both of the linkages you could have created a new component, and that way you'd have two separate components, but your sketch would be located in the main folder. And sometimes it's a little bit easier if you have multiple parts from one sketch, because you know that it's not going to be in either. As I said, it's entirely personal preference, so whatever you'd like to do, do it. But I just wanted to show you some of the different options. And that new component tool within Extrude and a lot of the other tools can be really useful to create a new component quickly. Now that we have our two linkages, we actually want to create our next part. So we're going to create a new component, and we're going to call this leg block. Click OK, and because our leg assembly was activated, it'll pop up in the right place. It's already self-activated because we created it, and we want to do this on the front view. So we're going to create a new sketch, and instead of on the side, we're going to look at it from the front. So we're going to select the front plane. Look at the front just to make it a little bit easier. And we're going to start off by drawing a rectangle, which is one of the most common. I actually used it probably, but the rectangle. We have multiple different options for rectangle, including from the center. In this case, we're going to use a 2-point rectangle where you define two of the points. We want our rectangle to be 60 millimeters deep or down in the Z-axis, and we can click Tab to change over and make it 50 millimeters wide, and click to confirm. Now that we've done this, we can zoom in a little bit, take a look. The next thing we want to do is we want to create an arc that's going in here, and we can cut that out. So we're going to go in, and instead of creating our arc directly, we're actually going to add two reference points. You'll see there's an option for points here, and this allows us to create just a single dot point on our sketch. Now we're going to put 2 points, one near the top and one near the bottom of this line, and make sure they're locked onto that line with that blue multiplied sign. Once we have, we can create a dimension between that point and the corner point, and we want this to be 15 millimeters down from the end. We're going to do the same to the bottom and make it 15 millimeters from the bottom. So now that we have our two reference points, we can go in, create an arc. We're going to use a 3-point arc, which means that we can define the end points of the arc and the center point as well. So we're going to select these two lines as our two end points, these 2 points, sorry, as our end points, and then we're going to put our arc into the part. Now notice, as I hover over the center of this line, a dotted line appears. That means that my cursor is directly in line with the center of that line. That's what we want. So you can click to create that, and then we're going to press D on the keyboard, click on our line, and we're going to create a radius. Now be aware that this is a radius value because it's not an entire circle. So just be aware that you're not adding in a dimension value rather than a radius, because you'll end up having double or double the size or half the size. So make sure you know which one you're applying. In this case, we're going to add a radius of 20 millimeters. Press enter, and you'll see that the whole thing shifts, and we have a 20 millimeter radius. You can also see the center point that appears. So it's 20 millimeters from this point too. Next, what we're going to do is we want that same arc to be copied onto the other side. Now to do this, we could just draw it again, but a bit like there was the pattern tool earlier, there are other ways to make an easy copy. And in this case, we want it to be a mirror. So we can draw a line of symmetry down the center of our part, and then reflect that part or mirror that part onto the other side. So to do this, first of all, we want to create a line. It's just going to be a reference line, so we're going to create it as a construction line. And we want it between the midpoint at the top and the midpoint at the bottom. And you can see the little triangles that appear, which indicates that it's in the middle. Once we have that, you can turn off construction again, and we're going to go into create, mirror. Much like the pattern, it allows us to select the objects that we want to be mirrored, which is our arc, and then our mirror line, which is our line of symmetry. In this case, we know it's in the middle because we used the midpoint constraint. You'll see if I click that as my mirror line, it will reflect it across, and you can see an image of what will appear. Click OK, and you'll see a bunch of constraints added. Now these are mirror constraints, and what that means is that this line is constrained to what this line is doing. So if we change anything about this line, say make it 25 millimeters, the other side will also change because of the constraints. I'm going to leave it as 20 millimeters. I think it looks quite good. Now that we've done this, I'm going to finish our sketch. Look at it, and we're going to press E to extrude this through. So we're going to select our part, and we're going to extrude it by 20 millimeters. Notice that we didn't select these outside parts so that they get cut out automatically. That's what we want. We want it as a new body within our leg block because that is what's been activated, so that's perfect. Click OK, and you have our part. And now if we look at our whole leg assembly by activating everything, you can see that we have our two linkages. Turn off the sketches for those. We have our center block, our leg block as well. Make sure that we save and say linkages and leg block added. And in the next video, we'll go through adding a few other parts and joining it all together.